Hey YouTube friends, welcome back. It's Pam and we're continuing to talk about how to deal with abusive, how to survive terrible work environments. And today we're going to talk about what is it like being a Christian in a Christian work environment that's toxic? How do you deal with that? Should a Christian ever have problems in the workplace? Especially a Christian workplace? Isn't it all supposed to be perfect? Let's dive in. I've got my beautiful lilacs here with me today as a special guest of honor. I just love lilacs so much, and the season is so short. What brought this on was a comment from a YouTube commenter on my channel, and appreciate the question. So Alan, he wrote, "How has faith helped you in your workplace?" And I thought, wow, that's really a great question, because I talk about my faith a lot. I do Bible study videos. I talk about God. And then I'm also talking about the real life toxic workplace that I had to leave. So the question would be like, okay, well, being a Christian, wouldn't that help you? Weren't you able to deal with, and he wasn't asking this, but I was thinking this, how do you kind of mesh those two things together? So I thought I would start by reading part of my answer to his question and then go into a few reasons why it's actually sometimes more, or always more, complex to be a Christian in a faith-based work environment that is not very good. There's a lot of things to keep you there. Let's just say that. So Al asked me, how has faith helped you in your workplace? And I printed out my answer. It says, "Hi Al, that's a great question. It is often complex when you work in an environment that is supposed to be faith-based, but lacks trust, integrity, and Christ-like care for others." So just because a Christian school, a Christian place like a church, even, or maybe a charity or some other faith-based organization, just because it's Christian doesn't mean that people automatically behave in Christian ways. You would hope that, and there's some of that, of course, but people are still people. Humans are still humaning. The human nature still comes out. So then I went on to say, it's harder to know what to do because you were looking for what God may be trying to teach you. And when I started researching this a bit, that really came out. And asking him if it's his will to stay when things are bad. So that's definitely a conversation that I had with God, saying, is there something I'm supposed to be doing here? Is there something I can fix or heal? Or is there some other reason why you want me to tough this out and just somehow find the strength to stay? In my case, I decided to leave. So back to my comment here. My faith helped me through that time, and prayer and wise counsel helped me see that God may be trying to teach me to trust him and stop people pleasing. God also taught me that continuing in that specific job made me complicit in the problems. And that's something that I've thought about a lot, and related to being in different churches where some not good things were happening. If I stay here and I'm not helping the problem, then am I complicit in it? Am I contributing to the problem? And not, am I enabling this to keep going in the way that it is? That's a question I think we all need to ask sometimes. Definitely asked it a lot. So, in a nutshell, faith gave me clear eyes to see and a strong foundation to rest on when the future was uncertain. And then I thanked him for a great question, because it is a good question. So, to kind of unpack that a little bit more, shouldn't Christians, and I'm looking down, I'm looking at some of my notes here in my little red book. Shouldn't a Christian be able to gracefully deal with or even transform a bad work environment? I mean, Philippians says, I can do all things through Christ, right? How does it go? Fervent prayer of a righteous man is powerful and effective. That's another verse. So, yeah, what about being a Christian in a Christian environment? Surely that should be redeemable. Surely I could find a way with prayer, even fasting, reading the word, maybe getting some Christian counsel. And at first, I thought that too. I thought that's one reason why I took the job, even with all the red flags that I saw. I thought, surely this is a Christian place. I'm a Christian. We're going to get through this. There's got to be a way. And yeah, I thought that. I thought that too. But here's the thing. Christian workplaces have a layer of complexity and can be really difficult because Christians use spiritual ideals and values and language to bypass or even weaponize verses, prayers to keep you there. Guilt is a powerful feeling, a powerful weapon used in Christian spaces too. Well, if you really cared about what God is doing here, you would stay. Or if you really loved these people, these students that we're ministering to, then you would find a way, or you would not complain. You would just do what we tell you to do. I've been in those situations more times than I care to count. And yeah, guilt, powerful weapon. There's real guilt and there's false guilt. And I'm talking about false guilt where you're manipulated into doing things by guilt. And even prayer can be used against you. So it can be used to scold you in a one-on-one or group setting. It can be used to gaslight so that you question your very thoughts. And it can be used to avoid accountability. It can be used for a lot of things. So yeah, like how do you argue against prayer in a Christian environment? How do you stand up for yourself when someone just prayed for you and used a lot of spiritual language and blessed you even? It keeps you down. So the principal at my last job did this very often and would use prayers at the end of a staff meeting or at the beginning of a professional development workshop to kind of call out people who might have a problem with whatever she was saying, and kind of reined everybody in and glossed things over and put this spiritual light on it so that you felt like, well, I can't say anything now. And I believe that that was intentional. And I also had a pastor back in the day that would close every phone conversation when I was a worship coordinator or director at a church. And he would close our conversations with, let me pray for you, and then just start praying and kind of put like a period or a ending to any outstanding questions, and gloss over and spiritualize everything so that at the end you're supposed to feel, well, he prayed for me, so he must care about me. And those two things are not always true. Another story. But talking about this really reminded me of that, of all of those prayers that kind of put a nice bow on the issues we've been dealing with and kept me from really standing up when I needed to and saying the hard things. Use the prayers to avoid conflict. used prayers to convince me of things. And I really, I really hate that, because prayer is conversation with God, and using and weaponizing prayers to keep people in their place, that's kind of evil, isn't it? It's kind of abusive. So this term spiritual bypassing that I talked about in my last video, it was coined in the 1980s by a psychologist named John Wellwood. And he was talking about what he noticed, where people were using spirituality as like a defense mechanism, as a way to gloss over problems with spiritual language and spiritual explanations for things that were happening. Maybe issues in the workplace, maybe conflicts, maybe things that needed to be addressed. So spiritual bypassing avoids confrontations, kind of like I was talking about with the prayers. Spiritual bypassing makes everything a spiritual reason instead of an interpersonal reason. Spiritual bypassing can help leaders to feel or to act like they're spiritually superior to others, keeping them from speaking up because, well, you're the leader and you are blessed by God in this, and I obviously don't know what I'm talking about. So it kind of keeps you quiet. And traumatic experiences are always framed as positive. For example, well, what is God teaching you through this? Or how can we reframe this in a spiritual light? How can we see what God is doing in this? And that can be true and that can be good, but when it's always used and it bypasses the trauma or the pain or the real issue, then it's doing the person a huge disservice, and it just delays the problem. Spiritual bypassing can result in detachment, in denial, and in repression of feelings, repression of emotions, where people just kind of detach from what's happening. And spiritual bypassing in general just is used to dismiss real concerns. So people in Christian workplaces are often advised, have you noticed this? To simply be nice, be civil, be patient. God is really teaching you patience in this, isn't he? Instead of confronting, because it's not nice to confront. It's not nice to even speak up when you're dealing with blatant abuse. And that definitely was happening in this last school that I worked in. Spiritual bypassing avoids accountability by making every issue a spiritual battle. And that is something I've heard a lot. Well, this is just an attack of the enemy. So if we can blame negative experiences or conflicts on demons, demonic activity, or on Satan himself, then we don't have to address it head on. So it bypasses the issue and takes the focus off what's going on and puts the focus on this spiritual battle. And two things can be true at the same time. There can be a spiritual battle, and there can be avoiding conflicts and avoiding dealing with terrible abusive situations because you're blaming it on the devil. Good Christians swallow negative emotions, and those doing real harm often get let off the hook. Another thing that can be used is suffering for the Lord. So this idea that just keep doing good, right? In due season, you will reap a harvest if you do not give up. That's a verse in the New Testament. And it can be weaponized and used against people to keep them in their place, to keep them working hard, to keep them quiet. So in summary, in faith-based workplaces, it can be almost impossible to face and deal with issues. We are still human beings, but many Christian spaces act like we have all graduated to heaven already. We're already in heaven and everything is perfect, or it has to be painted in a perfect light. So then narcissistic, manipulative, and abusive leaders get away with treating people poorly through spiritual bypassing, through weaponizing prayers and Bible verses, and blaming problems on satanic attacks. There's all kinds of weapons that can be used. Unfortunately, very sadly, and ironically, in Christian places, they can be the hardest to identify what's really going on and to deal with it. So, in my situation, as I studied and observed, and I did pray and I did wait on the Lord for answers, I realized that this culture was entrenched. It was systemic. It's kind of manipulative and abusive way of dealing with staff. There was no way around it. There was no way through it. And I realized that staying would not improve things, but leaving would at least make sure that I wasn't enabling it to go on and protect my own mental, physical, and spiritual health. So I don't have any regrets. And as a Christian who has worked in several Christian places, I know that there's really, really good places where Christ-like teachings are actually lived out, where people actually really care for one another and hear one another. And there's Christian places where that does not happen and where it's really, really hard to just do your job because you're being controlled and manipulated and pushed and pulled with all of this spiritual language. So that's my long answer to a short question. How does your faith help you in the workplace? And I know there's a lot more I could add to it. If you have something to add or something that you noticed or experienced, I'd love to read about it. Feel free to share it in the comments. Thanks so much for being here. Me and my beautiful lilacs say goodbye until next time. I'll talk to you again soon.